Okay, so good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you choose to watch this to everyone. This is recording for our last class, pretty short, so I didn't think it would be necessary for us to meet. But of course, if you have any questions, you can always follow me up. So our last lesson is on the elasticity of demand. As we mentioned probably at the beginning of the lessons, elasticity measures the degree of reaction of demand to particular changes. We want to see how sharply the individual demand of a good will change depending on what factors are played around with, for example, price or revenue. So we're going to see three different types of elasticity. That is in terms of price, in terms of other goods, and in terms of revenue. We'll see what effects they have, and there'll be a few points of research for you guys to look in for yourselves, just to get a general idea of the issue. So let's get into it. The first thing that we're going to look at is the élasticité prix de la demande, the price elasticity. So according to the first paragraph we have here, l'élasticité prix de la demande d'un bien mesure le degré de réaction de la demande du consommateur à la variation du prix de ce bien. L'élasticité prix de la demande est égale au rapport de la variation relative de la demande à la variation relative du prix. Okay, so this, as you can see, is in terms of price. So, like I said previously, it measures the degree of reaction of demand. So in this case, it is measuring it in terms of the variation of the price of the particular good that we are looking at. I'll just increase that a little bit. Voila. I think this should do. Right. And so down here we have a formula that is relative to this situation. As we go through the three different formulas, you see that the structure is the same, only that particular issues will change, which we'll see. So it says here that it is equal to the ratio of the variation relative to demand to the variation relative to the price. So variation of demand in ratio to the variation of price. And so we have our final formula here. This should be what you pay attention to, because it's what you use mostly. So élasticité prix is equal to the variation of x over the variation of the price of x multiplied by the price of x over x. Our third line here, la demande étant généralement une fonction décroissante du prix, la valeur calculée de l'élasticité prix est négative. So that's to say that whatever answer you find when calculating elasticity prix, should be negative. If the value that you find is positive or nil, which is 0, that's to say, there definitely should be a problem with the calculations, and you need to go back. And the last point says une élasticité prix EP is equal to negative a, where a is greater than 0, signifie qu'une variation du prix de 1% provoque une variation en sens inverse de la demande de A%. That's to say that a variation of your price just by 1% will affect demand in the inverse sense of the percentage of the value A. That's to say that in the degree to which you increase or decrease, usually decrease in this case, or increase, as we saw in the previous lessons, price was decreasing, but it can increase. But whatever percentage of movement it is will affect an inverse reaction. So that's to say that if you increase your price, demand will reduce, and if you reduce your price, demand will increase. So it's an inverse sense of reaction. in this case. Of course, we mentioned in yesterday's class that that's the general law of demand, but you may find that in some cases it's kind of different. For example, I mentioned the issue of the snob consumer who will buy goods in accordance to how expensive they are. So the general law should be that increasing prices would reduce demand, but for the snob consumer, increasing prices will actually increase demand for goods, and that's all. So what you have here is a couple of points of research. It gives you particular values of elasticité prix in terms of demand. And so what I want you to do is just research what these things mean and what implications they have. To make the work simple for you, you could just get these phrases, get these phrases and like input them in your Google. As usual, I recommend that you do this in French. So you can take these and put them in Google and just search what they mean. And yeah, you'll get your answers. The next thing we'll look at is élasticité croisée de la demande. So we'll go to our first line. La demande d'un bien X dépend du goût du consommateur, let's say their preferences, de son revenu R, du prix X, prix de X du bien considéré, et du prix de Y, d'un autre bien Y. So demand depends on these things: the preferences of our consumer, the money that they have to spend, their revenue, the price of the good they want to buy, and the price of other related goods, that is our usual X and Y. Cependant, on peut exprimer la demande du bien X en fonction du prix du bien Y. So the difference we have here between the first, which is élasticité prix, and this one is the fact that you are now considering demand in terms of another good. And so you have your function here, X is equal to F of prix de Y. So it depends mostly on the price of good Y. Toutes choses égales par ailleurs. As usual, it just means ceteris paribus. In this case, let me just move this back up here and bring this down. In this case, it means that since you're considering the price of good Y, the price of X and the revenue that you have to spend remains at a fixed level, which again comes back to the phrase ceteris paribus, which means in French toutes choses égales par ailleurs, or things otherwise being equal. Our second last sentence tells us that l'élasticité croisée de la demande du bien X mesure le degré de réaction de la demande de X à la variation du prix de Y. So in the same way that demand previously was being measured by changes in the price of good X, the actual good we want to buy, in this case we are trying to see how the demand for good X will shift when we change the price of good Y. In all of our studies, we've looked at two particular goods, X and Y, and how they affect each other. So in this case, we want to see how a consumer will react. Will they buy more of good X if they reduce the price of Y? Or will they buy more of good X if they increase the price of Y? Or an inverse reaction, will they buy less of good X if they increase the price of Y? Will they buy less of good X when they decrease the price of Y? So all of our focus now is on the price of good Y. Lastly, elle est égale au rapport des variations relatives suivantes. So like I mentioned previously, the formulas that you have for these three things will be generally similar. So we'll come back here. We saw that our formula was EP is equal to the variation of X over the variation of price of X multiplied by price of X over X. In this case, we see that we have variation of X over the variation of the price of Y, and we have price of Y over X. So you see the difference. We've now put our focus on the price of Y, and that's what changes everything. So yeah, that's generally it for elasticity croisée. Again, some points of research, it's the very same thing. We have particular values for elasticity croisée in terms of demand. And so, yeah, generally I just want you to just input perhaps even like these first sentences here into your Google and see what it means. What does it mean when elasticity croisée is greater than 0? When it's lesser than 0 or equal to 0? What does it mean? And then the last part here is talking about the two goods X and Y. But generally, when you look at elasticity croisée, it has implications for demand itself, yes, but also it talks about what kind of goods you are dealing with. It could be independent, substitutable, and the other type. So yeah, so generally when you find the answer for what it means when EC is greater than 0, you also find what kinds of goods that you're dealing with. So yeah, so these are points of research for you. And yeah, lastly we come to élasticité revenue de la demande. So in this case, if you've been following, the general idea is now that we're looking at the demand of good X in terms of the amount of money that our consumer has. Yeah, so the first phrase, la demande X du bien X peut être exprimée en fonction du revenu R du consommateur. So we have our function here, X is equal to G de R. G de R. Toutes choses égales par ailleurs. Again, ceteris paribus. L'élasticité revenue de la demande mesure le degré de réaction de la demande à la variation du revenu. As usual, so in this case, everything else remains the same. We'll just be changing the value of our revenue. Elle est égale au rapport de variation relative suivante. Again, the same structure of the formula, except now our focus is placed on revenue. So just increase that a little bit. Alright, so this part here, I want to confirm if I put in the correct formula. I may have forgotten to change something. Let's see. Cours de microéconomie, semestre 1. So just a moment. Valeur croisée. So you can see that most of the things I've asked you, voila, so there's an issue with that. A couple of the things that I've asked you to find, you can actually find within your polycopy that I sent at the beginning, if you bother to read it. But at this point you may not really need to. You have the general idea of everything. But yeah, so you see now that the focus has been put on revenue. And yeah, and that pretty much handles everything. The last point of research, we have particular values for elasticité revenue in terms of demand. So we have 0 is, usually here you have a range. You have 0 is lesser than ER and ER is lesser than 1. So this has an effect on the quantity of the good that you would buy. And also it has an effect on the category of goods that you will put them in. But in this case I chose not to eliminate this, so that if you were to have to search for this, you can at least search for these kinds of goods and see what they mean in terms of élasticité revenue. And yeah, that generally summarizes this last lesson for today. So let me just go through everything to see if there's anything that I might need to clarify. Yeah. Okay, so as far as I can see, the research points look clear enough. Most of what you'd have to do is just input the same text I've written here into your Google and you'll find your answers. But also, if you want to read the polycopy, you would find a couple of the answers there as well. So for these points of research, I'd like for them to be handed in. They would be due next week, along the week. I'd say, let's say Thursday, or I may clarify in the group. But for the previous polycopy I gave you, there's a number of research points there, and those would be due on Tuesday. Of course, we're done with our lessons, done teaching, but I would just like to end with that, to know that you've understood this last part of the work, and that yeah, hope it's clear. So even that you're present, I'd like to thank you for attending the classes and for availing yourselves. I understand that you all have lives, but for you to bring yourselves here means that you understand the necessity of learning these things, and they will help you when you come to school. I want to wish you the best of luck in everything that you endeavor. I wish you to work as hard as is possible, but also work smart. Find smart ways to deal with your work so you don't have to work hard all the time. If you work hard all the time, it will only affect your mental health and your physical health. If you can find a smart way to do a hard thing, then it's better for you. And so, either way, I've seen a lot of brilliant minds in here. I've seen people who are willing to work, even though not everyone interacted at every point. I saw the willingness in most of you to do what you needed to do, and I just wish that you would carry that on into your work when you come to Morocco. I wish you safe travels, and that you would all find settlement here. Of course, it's not easy to be away from home. It's not easy to handle the Moroccan system, but it has been done before. You have many seniors ahead of you who have shown it's possible, people who have attained their master's degrees at the ENCG, and people who found work here in Morocco, people who found work there in Zambia, and people who've just excelled in everything they've done, not just academically, but also personally. People find their passions here. They grow, they become, they start to do music and art and all of that. Whatever they want to do, they start businesses. And so there's nothing that is impossible for you, even though you're away from home, away from your parents, away from your guardians. It's the independence that makes a lot of things possible. So to conclude that long speech, I wish the absolute best for you. And it's been a pleasure teaching all of you and being a professor. So yeah, thank you. And good luck to all of you.